Environment will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. As a reminder, if members wish to insert a document into record, please also email it to documentsta@mail.house.gov. I now recognize myself for the purpose of an opening statement for 5 minutes. For 50 years, the Clean Water Act has functioned to improve the quality of rivers, lakes, and streams throughout the country, including in my home state of Georgia. Back in 1972, when Congress passed the Clean Water Act, it recognized the importance of a federal-state partnership as crucial to improving water quality and to providing a regulatory system that communities could realistically follow. While the Clean Water Act has had many success in maintaining and improving water quality for the benefits of citizens and industries nationwide, it unfortunately has been used to slow or stop progress on important projects. The Transportation Infrastructure Committee has begun this Congress by focusing on the theme America Builds, because we know how important it is to the well-being of our country that we remain a world leader in our transportation networks, infrastructure construction, and economic development. The Clean Water Act is one of the most consequential laws that our country has, and it is important to ensure that it is being used to balance the goals of water quality with ensuring project completion, improving supply chain networks, and delivering economic prosperity. In short, to let America build, the Clean Water Act needs to work. States, manufacturers, energy producers, cities, farmers, builders, homeowners, utilities, and many others rely on a Clean Water Act permitting process that is easy to understand, easy to follow, and easy to implement. Unfortunately, too often these groups referred to as regulated communities are left in the dark or actively undermined by increased regulation under the CWA by trial lawyers looking to make a quick buck, entrenched bureaucrats who don't have the country's best interests at heart, and administrations who bend the knee to radical environmental activists. Now is the time to revisit the Clean Water Act to ensure that it puts America first. To do this, we need to hear from those most affected by the law in order to know how we can improve our regulatory environment without decreasing protections for water quality. President Trump has recognized the importance of unleashing our nation's natural resources, ramping up energy production, and maintaining our physical infrastructure. These priorities will enhance the Trump administration's ability to pursue an America First agenda that lets America build. As the chairman of Water Resources and Environmental Subcommittee, I am looking forward to working with my colleagues to ensure excellence in transportation and infrastructure space and furthering the President's goals. Today's hearing marks an opportunity to do so by hearing from our witnesses on how to return the Clean Water Act to its goal of protecting our water bodies and allowing important projects to get done. I now recognize Ranking Member Skolton for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Collins, and congratulations for your selection to lead the Subcommittee on Water Resources and Environment. I look forward to working with you as the vice-ranking member in meeting the water-related needs of our nation, our communities, and the hardworking families that we represent. I'm privileged to serve Michigan's 3rd Congressional District in Congress, representing miles of beautiful Lake Michigan shoreline. It's a district whose history, lifestyle, and economic well-being are bound with the health of the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes are arguably the largest source of fresh water on the surface of the earth, containing roughly 20% of the world's freshwater supply. For our region, the protections of the Great Lakes and the health of our environment is not a partisan issue. It's something that is ingrained in our culture as we responsibly teach the next generation to be good stewards of our environment. Our quality of life and our very existence depend on clean water for everyday consumption, for commerce, recreation, and the overall economic vitality of the region. It supports our farmers who grow their crops from apples to pears, peach trees, and soybeans. It supports the foundation of the great craft beer that forms Beer City, USA, that I'm so proud to represent. That is why I am so deeply concerned with the harm that this administration and the allies in Congress are imposing on our clean water future. In just 3 weeks, the president has thrown cities and towns into chaos by shutting down funding allocated by Congress for water infrastructure projects, including the historic investments in water infrastructure provided through the bipartisan infrastructure law. This disarray has forced communities of all sizes to reevaluate how to deliver critical water infrastructure projects and will result in these projects taking longer, costing more, and ultimately delaying critical local economic development, environmental, and public health benefits. The administration's efforts will also undermine the roughly 28,000 jobs that are created for every $1 billion in water infrastructure investment, putting the jobs of laborers and manufacturers at risk, in addition to threatening our supply chains. Finally, these actions will hit the wallets of hardworking American families who will see higher water bills because of this uncertainty, at the same time that inflation is back on the rise. The silence of my colleagues across the aisle, whose states and communities are equally impacted by the president's moves to undermine water infrastructure spending, is somewhat surprising. It is my sincere hope that this silence is not a green light for further reduction in federal water infrastructure spending. We need it more now than ever. Our communities cannot withstand further setbacks to federal and state efforts to protect our water and our environment, and we cannot allow the president and his allies to burden American families with increased costs and public health risks. I welcome my colleagues to join me as I stand firmly in defense of our Great Lakes and freshwater supplies across the country to ensure a healthy environment and a strong economy for future generations. We can do both, and I look forward to working with anyone to realize this goal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chair Collins, for holding this hearing on the ways we can ensure that job-creating infrastructure keeps America moving and reduces supply chain challenges. This hearing is part of a series, America Builds. And thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, America is building again, and we need to keep it going. Holding up job-creating investments will not help America build. Slashing the workforce of agencies that play a critical role in permitting these projects will not keep America building. Congress invested $13.8 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure law to upgrade wastewater systems, prevent pollution, and support the quality of life across the country. These investments are critical, providing a lifeline to communities struggling to maintain water quality. These investments equal jobs. For every $1 billion invested in cleaning up pollution in your water, approximately 28,000 jobs are created according to the National Utility Contractors Association. These investments are helping drive the low 4% unemployment rate while modernizing our infrastructure. In just the last few years in my own district, Washington State's 2nd District, local workers are upgrading aging sewer and water equipment and protecting the local groundwater supply. From a $1.4 million state revolving fund loan in Whatcom County for replacing antiquated equipment, to a $200,000 engineering review grant to the Lummi Nation for assessing their wastewater needs, these job-creating investments are making a difference. And the work isn't finished. The most recent Environmental Protection Agency report on wastewater infrastructure needs estimated we would need $271 billion nationwide over the next 20 years to meet the standards that keep pollution out of your water. These challenges are not limited to one region. They affect communities from coast to coast, from my coast to the chair's coast, to the inland lakes and rivers of the ranking member. Part of keeping America building is improving permitting for infrastructure projects. Through the BIL, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS Act, we are seeing the benefits of investing in the workforce and the technology necessary to approve projects. Through investments in enhancing permitting efficiency across the federal government, the Biden administration reduced the median time to complete an environmental impact statement by 8 months, 23% faster than Trump 1.0. So let's keep that going. We can invest in infrastructure and protect the environment at the same time, ensuring that America builds while also making sure America breathes clean air and drinks clean water. When Congress passed the Clean Water Act over 50 years ago, members recognized the effectiveness and importance of the comprehensive pollution prevention measures, stopping pollution before it happens rather than simply cleaning it up. The Clean Water Act was enacted with an overwhelming bipartisan majority. Before this law, rivers and lakes served as little more than open sewers. Lake Erie was pronounced dead, and Ohio's Cuyahoga River literally caught on fire. But thanks to the Clean Water Act, the Cascade River in my district was designated as an outstanding resource water by the state of Washington, which protects that river from future activities or development that would degrade water quality. For decades, Republicans and Democrats shared these bipartisan principles to defend clean water, maintain a strong federal-state partnership to protect our waters, stop pollution from entering the system in the first place, and support a robust federal flora protections while allowing states to do more, but not less. And the bipartisan infrastructure law shows what happens when Congress does the right things and funds infrastructure. Step one to keep the progress going is to ensure that states and local governments can continue to depend on this federal investment. Freezing funds from the state revolving fund, from the Superfund, or other EPA programs is a step backwards. Predictable, reliable funding helps state and local government leaders make their decisions on allocating dollars to ensure the biggest bang for the buck. Sowing chaos and uncertainty on whether federal and state efforts to protect our water environment will not continue to help the American people. Working in a bipartisan fashion, Congress passed comprehensive environmental protection laws like the Clean Water Act and historic investments in infrastructure like the bipartisan infrastructure law. I look forward to finding ways to build on these bipartisan accomplishments this Congress. I want to thank our witnesses, all of them, for being here today. I look forward to your testimony, and with that, yield back.
All right, thank you. I want to welcome our witnesses. Thank you for your time and for being here today. We have with us today Mr. Robert Singletary, Executive Director of the Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality, the Honorable Shawn LaTourette, Commissioner of the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, Mr. Noah Hanners, Executive Vice President of the Nucor Corporation on behalf of the National Association of Manufacturers, and Mr. Buddy Hasten, President and CEO of the Arkansas Electric Corporation on behalf of the National Rural Electric Cooperative Associations. I want to briefly go over the lighting system for you there, in case you don't know. There are the three lights. The green means you have plenty of time. The yellow means you need to start finishing up. And of course, the red means to go ahead and conclude with your remarks. I'm going to also ask for unanimous consent that the witnesses' full statements be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. With that, Mr. Singletary, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Collins, Vice Ranking Member Skolton, members of the committee. My name is Rob Singletary, and I have the privilege to serve as the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this morning and to share Oklahoma's views on the implementation of various portions of the Federal Clean Water Act. The Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality is the primary agency responsible for protecting public health and the environment in the state of Oklahoma, and our responsibilities include the implementation of the Clean Water Act within our state. This morning, my comments are focused primarily on Section 401 of the Clean Water Act, with just a few minor comments related to Section 402 and waters of the U.S. To begin, Oklahoma is a fierce proponent of the proper implementation of cooperative federalism, as well as the right of states to set their own water quality standards and to protect water quality within their borders. Section 401 of the Act provides a powerful and very important tool that allows states to ensure that water quality within their borders is properly protected. However, the 401 certification process has been used in the past as an opportunity to address general or non-water quality related concerns. We feel strongly that this powerful tool should be reserved for efforts specifically related to water resource protection. We believe that allowing the scope of this review under this provision to be broadened beyond the protection of water resources would undermine the legitimacy of the 401 certification process and misalign it from the overall purpose of the Clean Water Act. In addition, even if a particular state was not interested in expanding the process beyond the protection of water resources, third parties could potentially seek to force a state to address broader concerns through this process if a broader scope of review was adopted. Even the scope of the current version of the rule, which purports to limit the 401 certification review to water-related impacts, is still ambiguous and potentially subject to misapplication. This ambiguity expands the workloads of state agencies, complicates and lengthens the review process, and makes certification determinations more vulnerable to legal challenges, potentially forcing state agencies to defend in court why they did or did not consider every potential water quality-related impact, no matter how distant or how unlikely. This, of course, would be a very difficult legal standard to meet. If statutory changes are ever considered, we advocate for clarifying language that would ensure that future EPA administrations are unable to expand the use of this process beyond the protection of water resources or beyond those water quality impacts clearly attributable to the project at issue. In regard to Section 402, currently the states are only allowed to issue MPDS permits for periods of 5 years or less. We strongly support providing states with the flexibility at their discretion to issue MPDS permits for longer periods, up to 10 years. Providing a longer period would provide more certainty for applicants, and it would effectively cut the permitting process in half over that 10-year period. In regard to waters of the U.S., Oklahoma has not sought assumption of the Section 404 permitting program, so our permitting programs are focused solely on stormwater and direct discharge permits. Since our agency has delegation under Section 402 to issue MPDS permits into waters of the U.S., and since we have authority to issue discharge permits into all other waters of the state, our permitting programs are not significantly impacted by the welcome changes to the definition of waters of the U.S. under the Supreme Court's decision in Sackett. However, we have heard from applicants within the state that they do continue to experience delays in receiving applicability determinations from our federal counterparts. We believe it would be useful if there was a joint federal-state effort employing the best available data and tools to map jurisdictional waters. Of course, this type of initiative would require ongoing effort and some expense, but it would likely decrease permitting timelines and provide more clarity or certainty to applicants. Again, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this important discussion. As always, we look forward to working with you, with our federal co-regulators, and other stakeholders as we pursue our mission to protect and improve public health and the environment in a manner that supports and advances prosperity for current and future generations. Thank you.
All right, the chair will now recognize Representative Poe to introduce our next witness, Commissioner LaTourette.
Good morning, Chairman, Chairman Collins, Ranking Member Skelton. Thank you for holding this hearing on one of the most vital and limited resources in our nation, clean water. I am privileged to represent the 9th Congressional District of New Jersey, and today I am truly honored to be able to introduce one of our witnesses today, an expert in environmental issues, a leader in the great state of New Jersey, and a friend, Commissioner Shawn LaTourette, pardon me. Commissioner LaTourette has over 25 years of experience in environmental quality assurance, natural resource management, and infrastructure development. When I was in the New Jersey State Senate, I was proud to vote to confirm him 4 years ago as our Commissioner of Environmental Protection. Commissioner, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Next, Commissioner LaTourette, you're recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Well, good morning to this entire committee. Thank you for holding this important hearing on this topic. Chairman Collins, Vice Ranking Member Skolton, our own Congresswoman Poe, thank you very much. Honored to join you. I have the privilege of serving the 9.3 million residents that call New Jersey home as their Commissioner of Environmental Protection. I also serve as a part-time adjunct professor of environmental law at the Rutgers Law School, and prior to my public service career, I was an attorney advisor that specialized in transportation and infrastructure projects, giving counsel to regulated entities on permitting issues, including under the Clean Water Act. Today, I hope to offer this committee a perspective from New Jersey, the most densely populated state in the nation, and the perspective of a state regulator, because as you know, state entities, like the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, implement the Clean Water Act. Much like this subcommittee's work to evaluate regulatory processes and look for opportunities to improve them, so too do my NJDEP colleagues, working to consistently improve our programs and services, and in doing so, we ask ourselves hard questions about how we can best achieve the delicate balance of promoting economic growth and protecting the public health and the environment. In answering those questions, we ground ourselves in the fact that natural capital is always performing valuable services for the public. Our air, our land, our fish, our wildlife, they're all doing important work that our fellow residents would have to pay for if we don't act thoughtfully to conserve our resources and invest in improvements. For example, degrade the marshes and wetlands that filter our water for free, or permit the discharge of too many pollutants into our waterways, and our residents and taxpayers pay more to build and operate drinking water treatment plants. There's a poignant example of this balance within one of New Jersey's most notable industries, tourism. Our small but densely populated state has one of the nation's largest coastlines, breathtaking bays, tidal rivers, and the famed Jersey Shore that's home to millions and that millions more visit each year as their getaway. As this subcommittee knows, the Clean Water Act is a program of cooperative federalism that relies upon partnership between the states and the federal government to effectuate the national goal of ridding ourselves of pollutants in waterways and achieving fishable and swimmable waters. The beauty of cooperative federalism lies in how the law empowers and supports states in taking local considerations into account while meeting minimum federal standards, and you see that cooperative federalism at play in Section 401. Additionally, as one of only 2 states that have successfully assumed responsibility for implementing Section 404, our wetland program provides another example of cooperative federalism under the Clean Water Act. We initially sought assumption for 2 primary reasons. The first, to provide protective measures to minimize or avoid wetland disturbance, but importantly, to promote a streamlined, consistent, and more accessible permitting process, because in the absence of assumption, project applicants were often challenged to adhere to 2 different schemes under federal and under state law. In New Jersey, we have seen the stability of the wetlands program under 404 firsthand, in that while under federal law, 404 has been subject of perennial change, New Jersey's assumed program has remained stable for decades, unaffected by changes at the federal level, and that is a level of continuity that our regulated community expects and demands. And as this committee also knows, our nation's water infrastructure is critically important and underfunded. Even with the infusion of a mass of resources from the bipartisan infrastructure law, we still have a $1.2 trillion national need for water infrastructure investment over the next 20 years. We in New Jersey have used our Clean Water State Revolving Fund program to invest in our communities, the health of our waterways, and the businesses that need clean water to thrive. What I hope this committee learns today from our discussion is that we always have to be careful not to overburden business with regulation and processes that may not be as valuable to the public, but we also have to recognize the inextricable link between economic development and environmental protection. But let us not make false choices between a healthy environment and a healthy economy. Thank you.
All right, thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Hanners for 5 minutes to give his testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Collins, Ranking Member Larson, Vice Ranking Member Scholten, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Noah Hanners, and I'm proud to serve as Executive Vice President at Nucor Corporation, where I oversee our sheet products group. Nucor is the largest and most diversified steel producer in the United States, and the largest recycler of any type of material anywhere in North America. And we are the only American steel producer that makes 100% of its steel here in America. Specifically, our method has a fraction of the carbon footprint and roughly 10% of the particulate emissions compared to an average integrated steel mill. We use 95% less water than an average steel mill, and we capture and reprocess 86% of the processed water we reuse before discharging. Several of our 26 and soon to be 28 steel mill facilities also have strategically constructed stormwater retention ponds to capture stormwater runoff. Manufacturers like Nucor create good jobs, drive innovation, and build our modern digital economy, all while making our environment cleaner. But right now, cumbersome and overreaching permitting regulations are holding back progress and hurting our nation's competitiveness. And we're not alone in this view. In a recent survey of manufacturers, 72% said that the length and complexity of the permitting process affects their investment decisions. If we want to grow America's economy, we need to fix this broken system. Nucor can speak firsthand to the difficulties of navigating the federal permitting process. In 2022, we announced the selection of Apple Grove, West Virginia, as the location for a new state-of-the-art sheet mill. At $3.5 billion, it is the largest manufacturing investment in the state's history. Nucor's sheet mills create an average of 800 full-time, high-paying manufacturing jobs, and we're proud to have already hired 300 West Virginia teammates. In addition, we anticipate approximately 2,000 contracting teammates at peak construction. The strategic location of the mill on the Ohio River required us to seek federal authorization under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. As a responsible industry partner, we worked diligently with state and federal agencies to gain the necessary approvals and begin turning dirt. The permitting process was onerous. It required us to work with multiple federal agencies with little direction and unclear timelines. This led to moving targets for our planning and execution, delaying the project and increasing costs. America can do better to help manufacturers create good jobs in our communities while continuing to protect our environment. Manufacturers have long advocated for common sense permitting reforms. The National Association of Manufacturers supported bipartisan efforts during the previous Congress to update the NEPA process and speed up construction of energy projects. Working together, policymakers can continue progress to achieve lasting, comprehensive permitting reform and make positive changes to our nation's environmental laws. This is critical as manufacturers contend with standards that are unreasonable and unworkable, such as those for PFAS and particulate matter. Serious reform should include manufacturers' priorities to provide certainty, streamline the permitting process, and give the regulated community a seat at the table. This may be accomplished through changes to environmental laws like the Clean Water Act that expedite judicial review, create enforceable deadlines, and increase the use of categorical exclusions. Last Congress, this committee took important steps toward reforming the Clean Water Act by advancing the Creating Confidence in Clean Water Permitting Act. As you continue this work in the current Congress, we ask you to consider several areas for Clean Water Act reform: clarifying timelines for agency action and decisions during the permitting process, establishing clear, common-sense definitions regarding the scope of project areas subject to permitting and consultation requirements, provide certainty that permitting decisions are determinative and help prevent never-ending litigation, promote the use of general permits and speed up projects with limited impact on the environment, ensure the use of best available science when setting guidelines and rules, encourage state assumption of permitting responsibilities, and focus state authority under the Clean Water Act on water quality. Nucor and America's manufacturers are the most advanced and sustainable in the world. Comprehensive permitting reform that increases certainty and removes unnecessary bureaucratic hurdles will enhance American economic competitiveness and protect our environment. I encourage you to seize this opportunity because when manufacturing wins, America wins. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Hasten, you're recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Collins, Vice Ranking Member Skolton, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Buddy Hasten, and I serve as President and CEO of the Arkansas Electric Cooperative Corporation, AECC, and Arkansas Electric Cooperatives Incorporated, AECI. It is an honor to be before you today to talk about how we can better serve our members and your constituents. AECC is a generation and transmission cooperative based in Little Rock, Arkansas, that proudly provides power for approximately 1.2 million members of Arkansas' 17 electric distribution co-ops. AECI is the Arkansas statewide trade association, which provides education, public relations, government relations, and other support to the electric distribution co-ops in Arkansas. Reliable and affordable electricity is essential to America's economic growth. And as our nation increasingly relies on electricity to power our economy, keeping the lights on has never been more important or more challenging. For example, Arkansas is losing 3,800 megawatts of baseload power in the near future, while simultaneously facing a tremendous increase in electricity demand from data centers and manufacturing facilities. Reasonable and efficient environmental regulations, including permitting programs under the Clean Water Act, are often the critical link in being able to successfully complete a project on time to meet the growing generation demands of an electric co-op. It takes several years to plan a transmission route or pick a viable property site to build a new power plant. It is essential that federal permitting programs, including those under the Clean Water Act, are implemented as intended by Congress and do not unnecessarily delay or hinder critical infrastructure projects that deliver electricity to homes, businesses, and farms across the country. Because electric co-ops are owned and governed by the consumer members that we serve, we are committed to protecting and maintaining clean water within our communities. However, having clean water is not and should not be mutually exclusive with having permitting programs that are reasonable, efficient, and meet the needs of our growing and ever-changing economy. We can and we should do both. Electric co-ops rely on clean water permits to build new generation facilities, build transmission and distribution lines in a timely manner, perform routine maintenance or repair work, restore service after hurricanes or other national disasters, and to undergo vegetation management practices along electric utility rights-of-way to prevent damage and wildfires. All of these actions are a huge part of our work in providing reliable and affordable electricity to our consumer members. To provide just one example, a few years ago, my co-op applied for an approved jurisdictional determination within the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to determine whether a Clean Water Act permit was needed for a new electrical transmission switching station. A very important new piece of infrastructure for us. In the meantime, just to be safe and to try to expedite the process, we went ahead and applied for a Clean Water Act permit. We did not receive a permit decision within the 9-month time frame initially predicted by the Corps, resulting in a delayed start for our project. Then, over a year after our original Clean Water Act permit application, the Corps informed us that a Clean Water Act permit would not be needed for the project. Ultimately, AECC was subjected to the Corps' application requirements, construction delays and increased costs, and the associated risks of a Clean Water Act permit denial. For the Corps to determine that no Clean Water Act permit would be needed for the project, a decision that could have easily been determined as early as AECC's first meeting with the Corps 1 year earlier. This is a pivotal time for my co-op as we plan to meet the quickly growing demands of our members. A more predictable and efficient process for securing those permits for our electric infrastructure would help us better meet those challenges. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify on this important issue. I look forward to responding to any questions. Thank you.
We're going to move on to member questions now. The chair now recognizes Mr. Crawford for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. Mr. Hasten, wonderful to see a fellow Arkansan here today. Appreciate you being here. The Arkansas Electric Cooperative powers a huge part of my district, as you know. Of the 17 co-ops in Arkansas, I think that 10 of them are responsible in some capacity throughout my district for delivering power to constituents that I represent. So it's incredibly important for my constituents to know that their federal government is working with their member-owned electricity provider. In your testimony, you mentioned that projects funded through USDA's Rural Utilities Service Loan Program to go through the NEPA process. Should the project also require a Corps of Engineers Section 404 permit as well, the Corps requires duplicative paperwork and studies to be done. A NEPA and a 404 environmental review for the same project seems to me the height of bureaucratic waste. In your experience in Arkansas, can you estimate how much time, money, staff hours, et cetera, lost productivity could have been avoided and are saved had the Corps and USDA worked together on this instead of working separately?
Well, Congressman Crawford, welcome from Arkansas. Yes, what we see is different agencies interpret NEPA differently. So I think that to us is a challenge. When you've got RUS on one side, Army Corps of Engineers, Department of Energy, Fish and Wildlife, each have the purview to interpret NEPA how they want. And then so that gives us uncertainty as to what exactly we're going to be exposed to. When you get down into Section 404, and maybe an example would be, we know a project's going to need a Section 404 Clean Water Act permit. We're going to intend to fund it with RUS, and so we work a lot with RUS, so we know those requirements, and those may, trigger the right reviews with their interpretation of NEPA. And so we would go do a cultural survey or endangered species review or a wetlands review, and we complete all those, and they go through a process. For instance, with a cultural survey review, we would turn that in to the State Historical Preservation Office, the SHPO. That goes through a process, let's say 60 days. They would then share that with the tribes, and so I think they've got maybe 60 days to respond. And so you can see, you've got months that build up here going through a proper process. Well, once we then get where we need to and we turn that into the Corps, they'll turn right around and take that same exact application and run it through the exact same process. So it'll go back to the SHPO, it'll go back to the tribes, and so you can just see it's a redundancy that's built in. So right there, you could say, well, that added 2 to 4 months.
Sure.
Just right there.
So, we've addressed this to some extent. We codified some aspects through the One Federal Decision piece in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, but was it enough? Do we need to do more?
I think the more that can be done in any business to streamline and make processes efficiency so there's not wasted time, I would say yes.
Okay. I appreciate that. Mr. Hanners, I'm going to shift gears real quick. I'm glad to see that you're here today. Nucor is a big presence in my district, and Arkansans know firsthand your company's commitment to environmental responsibility and how you can coexist with economic productivity. In fact, your entire business model is based on sustainability. I want you to talk about that a little bit. Some of the ways American steel manufacturing can be advanced through common sense environmental reforms and what effects that would have on environmental or economic development in communities like mine.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Crawford, and your support. And I thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about sustainability in Nucor. So if you look at our process, we are the cleanest steelmakers in the world, and we are continually striving to innovate while benefiting society both economically, but then also achieving higher and higher levels of sustainability performance. So I come here with a lot of pride in the way our team thinks about caring for the environment, at the same time building a project like our West Virginia mill that will employ hundreds of Americans, but also thousands of contractors who come on site, and then untold numbers of people who are impacted by that project in the region. So if you think about our West Virginia mill, we're building a mill that will be the cleanest steel production in the United States. and it will employ hundreds and by second and third order impact thousands of Americans in that West Virginia region. So we're very proud of that legacy.
Appreciate you. Thanks for being here. Yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Shelton for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our incredible witnesses for taking your time to be here today. As I stated in my opening remarks, water issues are not and should not be a partisan issue. I hope I'm not alone in saying that I am deeply concerned with the President's efforts to freeze critical federal funds, including dollars necessary to support our federal water infrastructure. We all can agree that regulatory reform is needed, clarity is needed, but what has happened in the last 10, 20 days has been the opposite of clarity. It has increased chaos and confusion. This uncertainty could stifle all of the progress that this committee and Congress as a whole has made through historic legislation like the bipartisan infrastructure law. Stoking this kind of chaos will result in very tangible threats to every single community that is represented here at the dais. Commissioner LaTourette, can you speak a little bit to how some of the directly blocked funds, as well as the uncertainty in federal funding, is not only going to harm water infrastructure projects, but also prevent local and state governments from looking ahead to fulfill their community's water needs?
I appreciate this question. My pause is because I'm thinking hard about it. I mentioned in my testimony that we have a $1.2 trillion need nationally over the next 20 years for drinking water infrastructure. 31.6 billion of that is in New Jersey alone. And we rely, the states, which are the ones that implement the investments in our infrastructure. State governments do that, not the federal government. And what we see in New Jersey is an opportunity using those federal funds. We couple them with state funds, and then we use the governmental funds together to then leverage private market funds so that we are able to create a capital stack for investment in water infrastructure that needs to be planned out for over the course of many years. And so we have projects that are in the queue right now that are phased, meaning that one fiscal year you might do a pump station, and the next year a main, right? And so when there is a disruption in federal funding, or even just the uncertainty that is created by a suspected disruption, and even a temporary one, it reverberates throughout the system. What I mean by that is right now, our state is in the process of formulating our clean water intended use plan for the next fiscal year, which for us starts July 1. And that provides water utilities, contractors, and others with guidance about how they should be sequencing their projects, such that a disruption in the federal funding source, upon which all of that investment is built, has a cascading effect that can lead to the delay, certainly, but potentially even the abandonment of a project, right? And here we are talking about water that every business, every person needs.
It's certainly critical in Michigan's 3rd congressional district. I firmly believe that the U.S. can have both a healthy economy and a healthy environment. In fact, through the Great Lakes region, I would argue that these two outcomes are wholly interconnected, as I discussed in my opening remarks. Commissioner LaTourette, again, I know New Jersey is a little different from West Michigan's shoreline, but can you speak to how water pollution can negatively impact communities' economies with potential harm to the tourism industry, property values, and commercial operations?
Appreciate that question as well, Congresswoman. So tourism in particular is a huge driver of New Jersey's economy, right? Our pristine beaches, our quaint shore towns bring in $50 billion a year in tourism spending. And all of that spending, all of that tourism is dependent upon one thing: clean waterways. I grew up in the 1980s at a time when our parents didn't let us go to the beach in New Jersey because of high levels of pollution. And today, the Jersey Shore has the best water quality that we have ever seen. And that is a function of implementation of the Clean Water Act as a matter of permitting and enforcement, but also because of that investment paradigm, which since the beginning of our clean water investment strategy has created 170,000 one-year direct construction jobs, right? And so not only is the Clean Water Act a necessity in terms of the health of our waterways, the health of our people, but it promotes the very businesses that dot our shoreline. So imagine those businesses that dot the shoreline, that rely on the influx of tourism dollars. Imagine their struggles when they have to close a beach because of bad water quality, and nobody visits and nobody spends.
Thank you. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Fong for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing, and thank you for the witnesses for their input. Mr. Singletary, I wanted to ask you a few questions. I'm glad that you highlighted the need to clarify the Section 401 certification process. Wanted to get your input in regards to this specific area. In California, it feels like we are constantly having to fight against our State Water Resources Control Board, which has used its authority provided under the Clean Water Act, along with other state and federal environmental laws, to delay efforts to develop new water projects and actually undermine our ability to utilize the infrastructure we have. The result is less water delivered to our farms and communities in my district, less clean and renewable hydropower generated for our grid, and less water security for everyone who lives in our state. There are numerous examples of less water security, and there are examples of the State Water Board issuing draft Clean Water Act 401 certifications aimed at implementing a plan that calls for the flushing of billions of gallons of water out into the Pacific rather than storing it to mitigate drought impacts during dry years. Much of the time, the requirements in these regulations have nothing to do with water quality or even the operation of the projects they're regulating. And I have statements from the Modesto, Turlock, and Merced irrigation districts, which neighbor my district, that provide two very recent examples that paint the picture of what is happening all over California. And I asked that to be included in the record. If I could ask you, what advice do you have for making sure that states are accountable to the spirit of the Clean Water Act when implementing these delegated authorities?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. I think that, it's kind of been a back and forth over the years. Different states have utilized that 401 certification in different ways. Sometimes it is, use the word weaponized against a specific project, and how we use it in Oklahoma, we use it specifically, again, to protect water quality resources within the state, and we don't expand it beyond that. I think if there was some language in the Clean Water Act that specified that it was to be focused solely on water quality projects, discharges, water quality standards, those type of things, list out specifically what those 401 certifications can be used for, that would probably limit some of the ability to take it beyond those water quality impacts that we feel that it's intended to cover.
Do you have specific recommendations, maybe delve a little deeper in terms of, how does it work in Oklahoma? And then when you talk to other states, what guardrails would you want to put in?
You talking about specific language?
Yeah.
I don't have any specific language, but I can propose some for you and get it to you.
Do you believe that the Biden administration's 2023 rule regarding 401 certifications, do you believe that it expanded the extent of 401 review beyond the congressional intent?
We do. We believe that there's the potential for that to be misapplied and go beyond impacts that are clearly associated with a proposed project and taken to other, downstream activities that may occur as a result of a project, but maybe aren't specifically related to that project. We think that potential is definitely there.
And in your testimony, you mentioned concerns about third parties potentially seeking to force states to address broader concerns outside the scope of the Clean Water Act if the current Section 401 rule is left intact. Can you expound upon that, like give some specific examples?
Sure. I mean, there's the potential, if that broader application is allowed or broader scope of review is permitted, that even though in Oklahoma we want to tie those reviews, our 401 certification review, to specific water quality impacts coming from a proposed project, some third party who may have an interest in stopping that project could try and utilize our 401 review. Any decisions we make, that's going to be subject to an appeal, so they could take us to court and try and force us to take that review further than how we believe it's intended.
Well, I certainly appreciate your testimony. I think the Section 401 certification has been weaponized, and to prevent needed water storage projects and energy projects, we need to find that balance. Look forward to working with you and the members of the committee to clarify the 401 process and streamline it as much as we can. Thank you. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
The chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Anders, I have a bit of a curveball for you because, sorry about this, because we have a Nucor facility in Seattle as well. I don't know if that fits under sheet products or not, but I did note yesterday Nucor said effective new orders received after close of business on February 10th the Nucor bar group will increase prices by $40 per ton on all rebar products. It may not impact sheet products, but it seems unusual, or not coincidental, that the day the president announced 25% tariffs on aluminum steel products coming to the United States, that Nucor is announcing an increase on rebar products. And I'm wondering if you know, in fact, if there's a relationship between the call for a 25% tariff on aluminum and steel imports in the United States and this price increase.
So to answer the first part of your question, Congressman Larson, rebar products does not fall under my group sheet products.
Mr. Spicer has rebar products.
That's right, Mr. Spicer. So you know Randy. It's a better question for him. But I will answer it at a high level in that we are very supportive of the actions taken by the president to impose tariffs on all steel products. And we believe that there is a strong tie to national security.
Okay, I'm sorry. It sounds like you memorized something or reading it. I'm just wondering, is there a relationship between these price increases and the?
I can't comment on that in rebar.
Okay.
I can't. There are a lot of unfairly dumped and traded imports that come into the country that are rebar, but I can't comment on the direct relationship you're asking.
Thanks a lot. Is there a similar price increase coming for sheet products?
Can't comment on that either. I mean, pricing has been increasing already. If you look at trends, sheet pricing has been at a low point for the last quarter before any tariff action. So I think that there are other demand drivers that may contribute to prices moving up.
Fair enough. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Mr. Singletary, in Oklahoma, as in my state, certainly in New Jersey, I'm sure, we have local governments, water districts using the state revolving fund money for infrastructure improvements. I alluded to this in my opening statement. Are you right now aware of any pause on that money? Are you seeing impacts or hearing from your local water district or even sewer districts or other municipalities on whether or not that money is available or they're having to wait at all?
No, in fact, I've confirmed that the money is flowing currently.
Okay, as recently as when?
I'm sorry?
As recently as when?
As recently as last week, beginning of last week, yeah.
All right, good. That's good. A lot of other money has been paused, and so we approved this money. Congress did approve this money There was a pause, there was a startup for some, not for others. So,
Yeah.
and we're not getting really clear messages at all from the current administration on what is moving forward and what isn't. So I do appreciate that. Do you want more of it?
Of course.
All right, that's probably the most important question we can, an answer we can get from anybody. I appreciate that very much. And then, Mr. LaTourette, I want to ask you about forever chemicals and what's been your experience in controlling the discharge of PFAS and PFOA in New Jersey?
So New Jersey has been at the tip of the spear on PFAS issues dating back to 2006. We did some of the first occurrence studies, and we have a prolific PFAS contamination problem in the state of New Jersey, in part because of the manufacturing centers, particularly in the southern part of the state. But we first set standards to control for PFAS contamination in drinking water back in 2020. And we put those standards in place before the federal government had acted. Those standards are now applied to drinking water systems. There are over 100 drinking water systems in the state of New Jersey that have impacts from PFAS chemicals, meaning, to the point I had made earlier of if we are not careful about our discharges into waterways, and if we are not regulating them and enforcing that regulation, inevitably that enters into the water cycle. That which enters into the water cycle ends up coming into our drinking water systems, and we must put treatment on it to remove it.
All right.
Huge cost.
And quickly, are you hearing from any New Jersey water systems or sewer systems about state revolving fund money being paused at all? What's your experience?
The way that our intended use plans and our function.
Can you give me a yes or no, or get back to me?
Not at this very moment, no.
Got it. I'll get back. Okay, thanks.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Hurd for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning to our witnesses. Mr. Hasten, am I pronouncing that right? I want to get that right. I represent Colorado's 3rd Congressional District, which covers about half of the land mass of the state. And rural electric cooperatives are vital to my district, just as they are to much of rural America. When it comes to the distribution cooperatives that actually deliver power to rural America, whether in Arkansas, your home state, or in Colorado, my home state, who owns those distribution cooperatives?
The cooperative business model, the members, we call them member consumers, they're ultimately the owners of the cooperative. All the, as a CEO, I'm charged with running the company. I report to a board. Those boards of directors come from these local communities that serve these co-ops. And so the board of directors comes from the community. I report to that board, and through that, we run the cooperative. But ultimately, we look at the business model as all of this exists to serve our members in a cooperative fashion.
So just to be specific, so the members at the distribution cooperative level, those are families, those are small businesses, those are ranchers, is that correct? They're the owners of those distribution cooperatives?
Yes, yeah, all of the members of that community that we serve, yes.
Your testimony mentions the cost of complying with federal permitting programs like Section 404 permits, Endangered Species Act, particularly the cost of delay. When it comes to those costs of delay, who pays for that?
In a co-op?
Yes, sir.
Every cost I get ultimately gets passed directly on to those members, the members of the community that we serve. So it's a pass-through. So any cost that comes to us, we're going to pass it right back on to the community that we serve.
So those get paid, those additional costs get paid by the farmers, the small business owners, the families that are served by that cooperative?
Yes, in the form of we will set electric rates to cover the cost of service. So any costs that we incur go into how much we have to charge for rates. So yes, indirectly through their electric rates, they'll pay for any costs that are incurred in making the power and getting it to them.
So, Mr. Hasten, would it be fair to say that these permitting delays effectively act as a hidden tax on rural America?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Garamendi. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be with you in your first hearing, and you certainly stepped into the big issue right at the outset. Thank you for doing so. I think I'll go to a piece of legislation that bipartisan in this House that we've been working on for several years, and it's the NEPIs. And specifically, Mr. Singletary, you raised this issue early on, that the permit is presently a 5-year permit for municipal districts, sanitation districts. That gives them just about enough time to figure out what they're going to do, and then they got to go get a new permit, which means they go back through the whole cycle again. The legislation we've been talking about is a 10-year permit period. Please comment on this. You raised the issue early on.
Certainly. Just recognize all the effort it takes to submit an application, go through that permitting process, allowing the state to expand the terms of those permits. You'd still have the same environmental protection. States, have the authority to address any issues, unforeseen issues that come up, but it would provide some certainty for the regulated entities. They'd have it for that longer period, and it would, like I said, essentially cut that whole permitting process in half over that 10-year period. You're only having to do it once instead of every 5 years, because like you said, by the time you get a permit issued, we're very close to, it's not very much longer. You have to start that process all over again and start planning for the next one. So.
You did raise a piece of the concern, and that is, in that intervening 10-year period, there could very well be some extraordinary event, unknown, unforeseen, that might cause or should cause a new review. I think you talked about that briefly or skipped right over it. Could you get to that a little more detail?
Certainly, Congressman. If there was an issue that's discovered, we still have the ability to address that through our implementation and enforcement process, but we can also trigger additional review, and we can actually, there's provisions that allow us to require that permit to be amended to address those concerns if something's discovered.
I raised this. We're going to reintroduce this bipartisan bill in the next few weeks, and I draw the attention of the committee and the new chair to it. I think it would be one of the ways in which we can expedite the permitting or reduce the amount of permitting that's required. So I'll let it go at that. There are other issues, I suppose, are to pound away on the impoundment issues that are out there. Do any of you have specific examples of the way in which the current Trump impoundment of funds is affecting your district? Mr. Singletary, I'll go on down. Maybe Mr. Hammers, I don't know. Mr. Hasten, surely.
I'm sorry, impoundment?
But this is the current impoundment of the federal funding.
Oh, the funding, yes, sir.
Yeah.
I think we in Oklahoma recognize the current administration's, that they see a benefit in reviewing these funds. We hope that review goes quickly. We do think that the projects that come through us, they're so critically important, whether it's wastewater or public water supply projects, that they're going to survive any review that occurs. We think they are that essential to Oklahoma and obviously the country.
We've heard from Mr. Hammers that delays cost money. So you are seeing delays in Oklahoma on projects?
We are not seeing any delays at this point.
Could there be delays if this impoundment continues?
Well, right now, the funding, the money is continuing to be released. We've reached out to EPA, who kind of controls the purse strings for us, and they let us know that all the funding sources that we're involved in, that money is still flowing to those projects.
Mr. LaTourette, examples in New Jersey?
So we saw some immediate implications from the funding freeze a couple of weeks ago, so much so that New Jersey took legal action in a court case with other states, and that judge returned a decision that the funds could not be frozen. They continued to be frozen, and the court had to issue another order just yesterday, reminding the president of complying with the law.
Mr. Hasten, examples from your state?
I don't have any examples where it's cost us any delay.
So we have a red state and a blue state, different. Interesting. Maybe there's targeted impoundment. I'm going to let it go. I'm going to yield back my 2 seconds. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chairman now, chair recognizes Mr. Burleson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see you up there. Congratulations. Mr. Hanners, the Clean Water Act was enacted to restore the integrity of our nation's waters. However, in recent years, it's been weaponized mostly by environmental zealots with a political agenda that goes far beyond the primary purpose of protecting water. Do you agree that the Clean Water Act has strayed from its original intent?
I can speak to our, what we've gone through at our West Virginia mill project. I appreciate the question, Congressman. We started off with an understanding of the Corps of Engineers that we needed a certain scope was going to be included in the permitting for this project. So what happened in this situation, and we've encountered in other projects of this size and scope as we navigate the 404 process, is the scope that was initially explained to us and that we entered into changed dramatically as we got further into the project. So very frequently throughout the process, we have other entities that are involved in doing a study, whether that's on artifacts we may come across, whether that's on wetlands, and each of those different interfaces with the permit causes examples of, I can give you examples of very long delays related to each of those different directions of the permit. So for a West Virginia permit, for example, or a West Virginia project, for example, we incurred hundreds of millions of dollars in additional loss attributed to the extenuation of this permitting process. So it's an example of us, we need certainty, stability, and consistency in the process. If we know what to expect when we enter the process, and we understand that the process is going to be timely, and we understand how to navigate the process, we are fully on board with navigating a process that both provides us the opportunity to get a project of that scope permitted, and also protects the environment.
How would you like to see that? Would you prefer to have it streamlined so that all of those entities that might be affected are asking for that research to be done concurrently? Or what ideas are there to streamline that process?
The states know best about their water resources, and our interactions at the state level have been very good. They're responsive, they're knowledgeable. If there is a question about how to navigate something, we get a quick resolution on what steps we should take. So we believe that we should get that process to the state level, and also keep the states focused on their statutory duty to prioritize water quality as they navigate the process.
I know in my own state of Missouri, I would agree with you. Our state, the Department of Natural Resources, does a better job than the EPA. However, our state and probably many states have an arrangement in place where they are required to enforce whatever the EPA has issued. So we had a lot of issues, for example, when it came to trichloroethylene being in our water supplies. There was a dispute as to what was acceptable levels of this product, which I guess is diesel cleaning fluid is basically what it is, or it's a byproduct of that. So what we determined was that when we tracked it down, there wasn't a law that was put into place. There was no one on the federal level that changed anything, but a unelected official had issued a guidance document, and that subsequently caused the state of Missouri, and I'm assuming many other states, to change regulations radically. Do you see that happening in other states?
We do. We've experienced that with our West Virginia project, another one we executed recently in Brandenburg. And I listening to Mr. Hastings describe his project early on, we experienced very similar challenge to what you laid out as well, and the process that he nailed down during his project description.
Yeah, it would seem that we need to do something just universally up here to make a statement or put into the law that Congress, that the federal government, unless it's an act of Congress or somebody who's elected making this decision. The force of an unelected official shouldn't carry the same weight. So I think that something that we ought to look into. Thank you. My time has expired.
The chair now recognizes Ms. Sykes for 5 minutes.
Thank you to the chair and ranking member for holding this hearing today and kicking us off for the 119th Congress for the Water and Environment Subcommittee. I appreciate your leadership in this subcommittee and look forward to working with you both as we work to improve our nation's water infrastructure and ensuring access to clean water for the people of Ohio's 13th Congressional District, where I have the honor of representing and all across the United States of America. The Clean Water Act exists for a reason. On June 22nd, 1969, the Cuyahoga River caught on fire due to extreme pollution for the 13th time. This poster next to me shows, although in black and white, what it looked like in Cleveland as a river caught on fire. Imagine a body of water catching on fire. And this image, which was taken of the fire in 1952, was published in Time magazine, article covering the 1969 fire that helped catalyze a movement, protect our waters and our planet, ultimately leading to the creation of Earth Day, which is on April 22nd, and a movement around protecting water in a much more substantial and meaningful way. You all know on this committee how much I love to brag on my district, and particularly my home state of Ohio. And this is not something that we could brag about, but thankfully the bad news was not the last news for Ohio or for this country, because this movement also led to the creation of the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency, and after much bipartisan collaboration, the passage of the Clean Water Act in 1972. I take some exception to some of the testimony I heard today about the Clean Water Act and enforcing it, because it's been very hard for Cleveland. I don't represent Cleveland, to shake off the misnomer, the mistake on the lake. And it has reverberated for generations to come. So it is important that we protect water, not just for this century, this generation, but futures to come, so we don't see other mistakes on the lake or whatever you want to call it. And so now the Cuyahoga River, which runs through my district, through the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, and it is one of the most visited national parks in the United States. It took 20 years and $3.5 billion in infrastructure investments to clean up the Cuyahoga River and to allow nature to return to its shores, something that we are still working on every single day. This underscores what it costs when we don't protect our waters, and the billions of dollars we can save by investing in clean water and water infrastructure before disasters strike. And so that's why I'm such a proud supporter of the bipartisan infrastructure law, which has authorized over $17 billion for communities nationwide to improve America's water infrastructure. Now, one of the largest investments that we've received was in the city of Canton to modernize some of its water systems, but I do want to talk about the impact on the federal freeze and this pause and review strategy, because this is significant. And I know we don't always like to talk about our history, but history will repeat itself if we continue to make the same mistakes. And so Mr. LaTourette, as a state leader who is tasked with protecting your waterways and the infrastructure, can you talk about what the bipartisan infrastructure law has done for communities, mid and small-sized communities like Akron and Canton, where I represent, and how this freeze or the pause and review strategy is impacting the ability to keep our waterways clean?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for the question. The bipartisan infrastructure law in the water space brought about $1 billion over 5 years to the state of New Jersey. And I mentioned before that we have a need for water infrastructure investment that's nearly $32 billion over 20 years. And I make that comparison because while the bipartisan infrastructure law was historic in the size and scope of its investment in our infrastructure, it is nowhere near enough. And we have to continue making the investments. We should fully federally fund the Clean Water State Revolving Fund to its maximum amount. Because what we are able to do in New Jersey, when we have a greater amount of federal funding and there is not the specter of risk that it will not be there for us when the next cycle of intended use planning is right around the corner. What we're able to do with it is turn that $1 billion into $4 billion with the way that we leverage our state funds and the private funds we bring in.
Mr.
And
LaTourette, I'm so sorry to cut you off because I could sit and listen to you talk about state revolving fund for hours, but I only have 2 seconds left, and I want to make sure I make a point that this poster is, again, indicative of what happens if we don't act. I believe in permitting reform. We should and we can do better, but the next frontier is PFAS, and I've seen a lot of the testimony hitting against it and trying to keep us from ensuring that we're keeping our water safe. Let's not let this happen again, and let's commit to working with one another to find appropriate permitting form and ways to keep our waterways safe. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate you giving me a couple extra moments, and I yield back.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Onder for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hasten, in your testimony, you underscored the importance of rural electric co-ops in providing power, especially to rural areas. In your home state and in Missouri, co-ops play a very vital role in our infrastructure and supplying power to those communities. Can you describe how inefficient clean water permitting adds to costs, which are already higher for rural electric consumers than if the permitting process were more efficient and sensible?
Congressman, thank you for the question. And for 8 years, I made power in Missouri for their electric co-ops, so I'm very familiar with the co-ops in your state. It's delays. If you have an expected sort of timeline, right? So the projects that we do, if I wanted to build a new power plant today, even the simplest power plant, a simple natural gas power plant, it's a 5-year process.
Right.
And, and so we layer in all of the planning and all of the, when we need to put in for permits and when we need to invest in infrastructure. Well, if you buy things, let's say very expensive capital infrastructure, and you've got this expected timeline when it goes in service, but then it doesn't. So imagine a $500 million power plant that doesn't go online. Everything's sitting there and you're gaining interest during construction, right? All of that's just adding to the cost. That thing's not creating any benefit. You're not putting power out to members or to supply load, generate revenue to make it a useful asset. So it's on that scale that these delays just add cost.
Right.
Not to mention staff hours, consultants, lawyers, those are just administrative fees that add up. And as the congressman from Colorado had mentioned, every one of those as a co-op, I'm passing that right on to the people that I serve in my communities. They're paying for it. I'm just the conduit.
So in your experience dealing with the state of Arkansas on permitting, how does that compare with your experience dealing with the federal government, the EPA, and the Army Corps of Engineers?
I would say that for Section 401 and Section 402 permits, we are lucky in the state of Arkansas that the ADEQ, Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality, is able to control those. They've been delegated that authority to do that.
Yes.
My experience with them is outstanding. Good. Yes, they're my regulator. Yes, they tell me I have to do things that are like, it's hard to do.
Sure.
But there's a partnership.
Right.
So I'm trying to serve the community. I'm trying to serve economic development. I'm trying to do that. They've got their job to do. But you feel that sense of partnership. So if they tell me it's going to be 60 days, I get it in 60 days. If they do it, sometimes they get it to me faster. So a real partnership, good communication. When we go to Section 404 and we're working with federal agencies, it is, I would say, generally poor communication or ignored communication or continual emails and calls from us to get anyone to answer the phone type of communication. And to say that it's a bit of the runaround, instead of partnering together to say, look, this is important, clean water is important, we got these rules, how do we comply? Working with our Arkansas department. I would also say I've worked with Oklahoma, great. worked with Missouri DNR, I've worked with Iowa DNR. I've had great experiences with all those state agencies.
Good.
When you get to federal level, there's a certain sense of we're the law, we're the top, and
Yes.
what we say goes, no questions asked, and I don't really feel compelled to, I don't have to do this under a timeline other than what I want, and your project isn't really a timeline that means anything to me.
Yeah, you must at times wonder whether this is really the law that you're hearing about or the opinion of some unelected bureaucrat. From your perspective, what would be the impact on electric co-ops if nationwide permitting were not reauthorized?
If it was not reauthorized?
Not reauthorized.
It would be detrimental, very detrimental. I mean, there's a lot of things we do under nationwide permits, right? Transmission line maintenance, right-of-way clearing, recovering from storms.
Sure.
So if every single thing we did that needs to be in some way sort of time-sensitive,
Yes.
if it had to go through the full review, and some things need to go through that full review.
Right.
But a lot of things do not. And if you got rid of those, it would be really damaging.
Thank you. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Friedman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Collins and Vice Ranking Member Skolton. I'm very honored to be a member of the subcommittee. Water is hugely important in my area in California and in Los Angeles. I served on the Metropolitan Water District Board of Directors for 8 years and sat on the Water Committee in the California Legislature, and I'm really looking forward to working with all of you on water issues. The health of our families and our economy and local water bodies and wetlands depends on robust investment in water infrastructure and strong water standards. And I've been very interested to hear today about the sometimes tension between environmental protections and economic development and moving projects forward. And certainly everybody wants to make sure that any regulation that we have moves quickly, that entities that are looking for permitting in the regulated community have a process that is fair, that moves rapidly, and that makes sense. But at the same time, I do want to push back a little bit about some of the terms that I've heard, like radical environmental activist. I don't think that it's radical for families to want to make sure that their children are not drinking PFAS, chromium-6, lead, and other harmful materials. It's certainly not radical for the people of Los Angeles to be very frustrated that when we have our droughts like we have every year, that we can't drink from the giant aquifer that's under Los Angeles because of historic pollution. And I think that it also, for those of us who want government to be efficient, really bristle at wasting billions of dollars every year cleaning up pollution, air pollution, water pollution, pollution of the ground from industries that could have been prevented from causing this pollution in the first place through strong environmental protections and environmental regulations. So it's not at all at odds for those of us who want efficiency and economic development to also demand strong regulation to prevent that kind of waste, to prevent the human cost and human health impacts from not regulating, which we have seen happen so far over the years. Now, the recent Supreme Court ruling in Sackett versus EPA to exclude certain wetlands from the definition of waters from the United States pushes back decades-old regulation and makes fewer wetlands to be covered under the Clean Water Act since the 1970s. The ruling excluded ephemeral waters and intermittent waters, both of which are incredibly important to California because of the way our hydrology works. In fact, 90% of California's original wetlands have already been destroyed. And the Trump administration stripped away environmental protections in their last administration, and there's every indication that they want to do so again. That would be harmful to our pocketbooks and certainly harmful to public health. I was proud in the California legislature to have passed AB 2875, which codified the executive order from Governor Pete Wilson to establish a state policy of no net loss of wetlands and only long-term gain. And I'm proud to say that that bill was bipartisan, that it was supported by Republicans and Democrats alike who recognized the importance of these resources. Commissioner LaTourette, I want to thank you for being with us today. Can you just maybe briefly speak to the importance of the Clean Water Act and a robust environmental protections to the state of New Jersey?
Thank you for the question. I think we have to recognize that every single thing we do across our landscape, every single thing we build how we operate our businesses, how we run the government, always has an environmental externality. Everything has an environmental externality. The question that I think we should be asking ourselves is, how do we reduce those externalities such that it's not a great cost to business? Because when those externalities are not addressed at the beginning, they become a cost necessarily to someone else, harming someone's health, diminishing our recreational and commercial fisheries, right? Because the externality that is wrought by a lack of adequate pollution control on wastewater discharge has to be addressed somewhere else, because there is only one water and it is all connected. And so if we are not reducing our pollutant loadings to waterways, the public, the taxpayer, is going to be left holding the bag, such that that pollution is then remedied by a drinking water system, right? For example. So we, I believe, have to look at this more holistically and not only as a cost center to any one particular regulated actor.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Westerman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Collins, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. And I'm just going to keep rehashing something that's been talked about a lot. Something I'm going to start with a story that I've talked about a lot that doesn't really deal with clean water, but it deals with a broken process. I think if my staff wants me to wake up in the morning, they give me a lot of coffee and they schedule meetings with people who are frustrated with our permitting process. And this morning I had a first meeting was with a county executive from back home in Arkansas who was telling me about how long it took him to get a permit from the Corps of Engineers to build a bike trail, little section of bike trail, and ended up having to go to Vicksburg from Little Rock, even though there's a Little Rock district right there close by. And then I had the pleasure of meeting with FHWA on a road project that I'm going to keep talking about this if I live long enough and keep getting reelected until they get the project finished. But we had a road washout, Forest Service road washout in 2020, and then another landslide on the road in 2022. And they have $6 million to study and fix the project. And the best date they could give me this morning was 2027. So we're looking at 6 or 7 years to fix a 1 acre landslide on a gravel road in the National Forest that's causing people to have to go 30 and 40 minutes out of the way to get to school, to get to the hospital. There's a concessionaire on the Forest Service land that his business has been hurt by this. And it's all because we have a broken permitting process. So FHWA, they're doing what the Forest Service wants to do because they're dealing with emergency funding and it doesn't come out of the Forest Service budget. So instead of building a road around the slide, they're having to repair the slide. So we're talking about $6 million to fix a gravel road. And if you stand back and look at it, you think this has no environmental benefit. It's just the bureaucracy that's dealing with an antiquated system. So I ask, why does the Forest Service not want you to build a road around it? Well, we have to go through at least an EA and maybe an environmental impact statement through the NEPA process. But if we go where the road already is, we can just do a CE. Well, my question is, why do you have to do a CE to fix a road that's been there for a long time? I mean, there's no common sense in these laws. And I don't totally fault the bureaucrats. I fault Congress for not fixing the system. And that's Mr. Collins and I serve on another committee that has jurisdiction over NEPA. And I think there's going to be a good bipartisan effort this Congress to fix the myriad problems with NEPA. And in talking to FHWA, they said the worst group to deal with is Corps of Engineers. You got to do a permit with Corps of Engineers. So we need broad permitting reform, and we'll just start at the end. And if you got one suggestion on permitting reform, we want to protect the environment, but we want a streamlined process where we can actually build stuff in America again.
If I had one suggestion, I would give states more authority to implement the programs and kind of make changes to the programs as is necessary within their states. We, a lot of times, are much closer to the projects. We have a lot more at stake for some of them because they're happening in our state. We can be a lot more responsive. Sometimes when, we're working with our counterparts, our federal counterparts, they may not be located. In fact, almost none of ours are actually located within the state. So we're dealing with folks at distance, and sometimes that can slow down the process.
Mr. LaTourette?
I agree with my colleague here from Oklahoma that state environmental agencies are more present and in the work with the regulated actor than federal agencies are, unquestionably. New Jersey has maximum assumption under almost every one of the federal environmental laws. And then we add additional protections because that's what our public demands. And we are able to trim permitting timelines down as a function of everything living under one roof. We have an office called the Office of Permitting and Project Navigation, for example, that they exist to steward projects through the regulatory process so as to not land in one of the gaps that folks have identified here today. And so I believe maximum state assumption, but that needs to be funded by Congress, right? Categorical grants to state environmental agencies need to go up.
Mr. Chair, if it's okay if the other witnesses would submit a written answer to that, I would appreciate it. I'm obviously out of time and I yield back.
Yeah, I'll probably finish with that question myself. The chair now recognizes Ms. Poe for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to all the witnesses that are here today. We've heard, and much has been said, that over the 50 years, the Clean Water Act has served to reduce pollution in waterways across this nation. With the passage of time, it is easy to forget why the law was enacted in the first place. Lakes were filled with chemicals, streams were clogged with sewage, and we heard earlier testimony or comments about how rivers were literally on fire. Our environment and public health has changed for the better thanks to the bipartisan Clean Water Act. I'd like to mention and to ask Commissioner LaTourette, New Jersey is an excellent example of how states can improve efficiency in the permitting process. Could you please share with us what are some of the best practices from New Jersey that you would recommend to other states?
So the first thing that I would recommend is that we support federally the assumption of the programs we've talked about here today by states, that the federal government increase its funding to states for implementation. Our state employers are cheaper than your federal employees, and I think that that is an important point. And they're closer to the work on the ground. And what we have seen in the state of New Jersey is a greater degree of efficiency and speed because of that integration of permitting processes. Now, I know we've heard a lot today about delays, costing time, costing money, and then that can be a problem. I recognize that that can be a problem. But permitting reform isn't just one thing. When we say that it's taken 7 years to get this project permitted, there are local, state, and federal considerations. The most important thing that any regulated actor can do, and I know this because I counseled them as a lawyer in the private sector before, is to run all of their processes concurrently. There are so many issues that you can identify up front and then talk to your state regulated entity, regulated agency beforehand, well before you ever make a permit application. because we're there to work with you and identify any of the flags way up front. And when you do that up front, your permitting process is far more expedient.
Thank you for that. Can you also share with us how ensuring clean water for our communities pay dividends in terms of savings in other areas like public health and contributing to the economy?
So aside from creating the 170,000 construction jobs that I mentioned, our water bank investments help to make our waterways more swimmable and more fishable, directly bearing on our tourism and recreational economy. But there are really important public health issues at work here. Take, for example, in the northeastern section of New Jersey, where there are communities built out 150 years ago with really dated, old infrastructure, combined sewers that bring together the stormwater and the sanitary water, all going through pipes that are not big enough. And then what happens? Backups of that sewage into our streets that our children have to walk through on their way to school. That is not okay, right? And by making more investment, we can both increase permitting timelines, but get more projects in the ground.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for responding to that question, because my very own city of Paterson knows all too well what that impact is like, particularly when we're talking about combined sewer systems and how antiquated they are and how costly they can be. Having this in place is certainly going to be very helpful. Thank you very much for your remarks. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Mr. Hanners, Nucor, says you're the largest, most diversified steel producer in the United States. Carbon footprint, roughly 10% of the particular emissions to the average steel mill out there. 95% less water than the average steel mill. 86% of your process is the water is processed for its discharge. I think it's safe to say that Nucor wants to be the best in the industry, hire the best people, take care of the environment, and overall be the best steward that you can be. So I want to kind of delve into something real quick. I read through a lot of your testimony here, and I want to get into your West Virginia project, because I live by example. I'm just a common sense type person. You give me an example of what's going on, I can better understand it. I want to kind of look at the loading dock and the barge problem that you had there. And I don't know how much you can speak on it, but I do know that in reading here, it caused your project to go from $2.7 billion to $3.5 billion. And then if you could, I don't know if you can intertwine some NWP, the nationwide permitting in that. Would that have helped? Not helped, since this is obviously not the first loading dock and barge dock that you have ventured on.
Certainly. I appreciate the question. You're right. We are as passionate about the environment and continuing to innovate to find cleaner ways to make steel. You'd be astounded at our team at any of our sites you visited. It is part of our culture to find new ways to better serve the environment. To your questions about West Virginia, the port facility is one example. There are others of us finding a specific instance. In this case is mussels in the water in the Ohio River, West Virginia, and then really struggling to find a solution to partner with the entity, in this case the Corps of Engineers and the Fish and Wildlife Department, to create a solution. And it wasn't that we weren't ready to make the investment to create the solution. It's that we couldn't get clarity on what the solution needed to be. And that's where the boundaries and where we think reform could come in and really help us be much more efficient and on time and on budget with a project like this. Is we're willing to make the investments necessary to meet our responsibilities to the environment, but we need to know what they are. We need clarity, and we need the ability to take action in the way that's expected of us. As long as the permitting process is consistent and it's clear to us what we need to do, and we can get the answers and responses we need in a timely manner, we are fully on board with making those investments and making those changes. Well, so your point about the $2.7 billion to $3.5 billion, over $3.5 billion now, that was one instance, but I could list off 5 or 6 others that were very similar to that.
Well, let me ask you kind of what Chairman Westerman was asking when he said the one big change. If you could make one change, And I know the two gentlemen to your right suggested more state rights, and believe me, I'm big on state right. I mean, it's a whole lot better than having this place up here make decisions for you. But would you say clarifying regulations or states' rights would be, or something else?
So states' rights, yes. The state entities we work with are responsive, they're thorough, that we partner with them. It feels like a partnership. But I would also add judicial review, limiting judicial review. We are fully on board with complying, but we need resolution. And sometimes we will get midnight, last day of the permitting process, we will get somebody who will drop in a challenge, and then we'll need to extenuate the permit in order to go after that challenge.
I mean to break it. I know in highways and transit, a lot of your road builders just factor in an extra 30% of the cost to build roads and bridges just because of environmentalist, frivolous lawsuits. Is there a number do y'all add into the equation?
No, we don't account for that up front, but I'll tell you what happens is when we have bad experiences, a challenging experience like West Virginia, it makes us more conservative with our next iteration of how we think about the returns we're going to generate on a process, which makes us less likely to make an investment in the future.
Right.
I mean, we're a successful company. We plan to continue to grow, but it does take a little bit of our willingness to make that next investment. It makes us ask more questions, to be more conservative.
Mr. Hasten, I want to give you 30 seconds to answer Chairman Westerman's question. What out there would you like to change first if you had the option?
I'll agree with everyone else that said, push as much down to the states as you can. They're in the local community. They know the situation, and there's more of a partnership. And then I would think at the federal level, just some consolidation. You got all these individual fiefdoms all trying to, determine things in an individual way and with no real accountability. Like in my company, if I tell you I want this in 30 days, I'm going to send you an email and say, where's it at? And you will be held accountable. There's no accountability anywhere. Just some accountability, set some clear deadlines. We're not asking everybody to lower the hurdles. Keep the hurdles high, keep the standards high, keep the water clean. But let's run the race, and let's hold people accountable to timelines.
Thank you. And I yield back. The chair now gives 5 minutes to Ms. Gillen for questioning.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for coming and testifying today. Mr. LaTourette, in your testimony, you highlighted how under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, project applicants were often challenged to adhere to two different but overlapping permitting processes at both the state and federal level. Can you talk about some of the ways that we can streamline the permitting process to get rid of duplicative and redundant requirements, but yet keep strong environmental protections in place?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we can do is to provide states with the incentive to adopt the federal programs and implement them on behalf of the federal government. Now, that doesn't give states a free pass, let's be clear. The states are still overseen and should be by the US EPA and in some instances the Army Corps to ensure that we are compliant with the minimum federal standard. But bringing it down to the state level would necessarily have a beneficial impact, as folks up here have recognized. But that does not mean compromising environmental quality, and I'm glad to hear everybody up here speak to that point, right? Because we have to acknowledge that the pollution controls that EPA sets are minimums, truly minimums. They are not acceptable in the state of New Jersey, and they don't allow us to be proactive about new pollutants that are emerging in the marketplace and in our water supplies.
Yes, just following up on that, I want to get rid of redundancies in our permitting processes. I was a local government official before I got here, and I know that sometimes we could get caught up, as you say, Mr. Henners, in litigation forever just trying to get a project across the finish line. But we do have states with varying standards. So that's why when I hear states' rights and things like that, some states don't have the same standards that others do. Mr. Hanners, in your written testimony, I was not here for your verbal testimony, but you talked about emerging contaminants, and some of the standards may be too high. Well, we know that these are carcinogens, And I certainly don't want my family drinking carcinogens. I don't want other people's families drinking carcinogens. And I do know the real costs of filtering these emerging contaminants out of our system. But I think that we need to agree that we have to have a very high standard when we're talking about water containing these emerging contaminants. So what do you think is the best way forward to get some uniform agreement so we can streamline the permitting process, Mr. Hanners?
Well, I'll say that manufacturing processes like ours, Nucor, but I can speak more broadly, are cleaner than ever. And we strive to find new technology to make it even cleaner. And I can give you examples like a carbon sequestration project we're navigating in Louisiana, where it will make a material impact to the cleanliness of our steel. We're making those investments. We're working on those things all the time. The challenge with the new regulation you mentioned, PM 2.5, is we need a seat at the table because some of those standards are either unclear or we're not sure how to manage that problem. And if we have a seat at the table during the implementation or the build of that policy, then we can help one, equip us with a better understanding of how to navigate that, but two, potentially push back or help shape something that achieves an outcome of making the environment cleaner, but also is feasible and implementable by companies like ours and manufacturers like ourselves.
Thank you. Mr. Singletary, I believe in your written testimony you spoke a bit about how the permitting process was also complicated by multiple different agencies weighing in. I think that's also the litigation that you spoke about in your testimony, Mr. Hanners. What is a way that you think that we could streamline the permitting process with giving a seat at the table to all the different various agencies that might be involved in a big project or might have some impact on a big project?
Your question, I'm sorry, Congresswoman, it was regarding multiple agencies in the same process. I think making sure that the role of each of the agencies is, well-defined and coordinated is probably the biggest issue. I can tell you, when we look at our permitting program at the agency, we're looking beyond just what coordination with other agencies is like. We've got an Office of Continuous Improvement that's gone through every step that we take internally to help, determine what are the slowdowns in our process that are caused by us. How can we improve those? We're getting big investments into different platforms that we need for the permitting process, updating our rulemaking, and potentially some legislation to help streamline our process. I think something like that at the federal level would really help coordinate all those efforts.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you, ma'am. The chair recognizes Representative LaMalfa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, panelists, for being here with us today as we talk about the Clean Water Act and its well-intentioned back in the 70s when passed and its weaponization these days to stop so many projects and other things beyond the scope of what I think was ever intended and been reinterpreted according to Army Corps and others. So we talk about the different permits, the 402 permit under NEPDES, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. All pollutant discharges into a water of the U.S. are prohibited unless that 402 is granted. So this is for private sector and as well as federal. And we talk about a 404 permit for dredge fill on something called the water of the U.S., which the definition of water of the U.S. has been abused greatly in the last 20 years or so. And when we're talking about dredge permits, for example, I can think of a really absurd example where there was a new bridge being constructed where some of the pilings had to be within a lake. And so they had to move some of the soil to build the new uprights. And so that soil being moved, it was now considered a pollutant, even though it's the same soil that was started out under the water and could have just been moved aside and remained under the water. Instead, had to be hauled away at who knows what expense and delay. So the 402, again, is being abused. And the concern I want to bring up here is how that applies to firefighting and what Forest Service has been looking at with requiring a permit to use a material for fighting fires. The the fire retardant that is so extremely important to be more effective in fighting and preventing the spread of fire. You know, I mean, again, we've seen it time and again with the fires in the West, in my home state of California, in my own district, the community of Paradise destroyed, community of Greenville destroyed, town of Happy Camp partly destroyed, others. And then what's really gotten a lot of people's attention, obviously, it's what happened in Los Angeles here so far, even though it can be known that each year you're going to have the Santa Ana winds, you have the brushy hillsides, they suspend removal of brush, and that's partly why we're where we are in SoCal. So when we talk about the use of fire retardant, that's the pink stuff that gets dropped out of the aircraft, the DC-10s, the helicopters, and all that, when it isn't just straight water. We have to work to hang on to that. So there was a lawsuit, incredibly, environmental group sued the Forest Service a couple years ago to stop the use of that. And in 23, the Forest Court ruled the Forest Service violated the Clean Water Act by failing to get an MPDES to use it. So the court declined to use an injunction to completely stop the use of retardant, but at any moment, it could be taken away. So for Mr. Hanners, we've never seen this before where Forest Service had to get this NPDES permit for applying the retardant. My understanding is that they may make both aerial fire retardant and airplanes used to firefighters somehow have to use it, have to battle through this lawsuit process. So would you talk to us about this a little bit, Ms. Hanners? It would have to come from either EPA or jump through the hoops of California, and it can take a very long time. We could lose this product if they get their way. Would you please comment on that a little bit?
Certainly, I can't comment on the specifics of fire retardants and that policy, the decision you're referencing. But I can say for manufacturers like Nucor across America, it's important we have a robust supply chain of fire retardants. And I think more importantly, a little bit more broadly, we understand the rules of usage of not just fire retardants, but navigating a permit process or using a new type of, or even a well-used type of consumable we may use in our process.
Well, if we had to go straight water, if you didn't have this material, which has a sticky factor to it and can last longer, water just coming out of an aircraft can, so especially in hot weather, as it hits hot fire, completely dissipate. If we don't have this material, how effective are we going to be at suppressing or controlling the spread of fire?
I can't comment on that.
Can't comment on it. All right. Should Congress look at clarifying the Clean Water Act to ensure these activities continue to be done? Ms. Anders.
Could you repeat the question?
Should Congress look at clarifying the Clean Water Act to ensure these activities, such as air application, can continue without this owner's permit?
I can't comment on that.
The chair recognizes Representative Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a question for Mr. LaTourette. The District of Columbia, the nation's capital, which I represent, has greatly benefited from federal investments in our water infrastructure over the last decade. The DC Water and Sewer Authority's multi-billion-dollar Clean Rivers project is expected to reduce combined sewer overflows in the district's waterways by 96% by 2030. Mr. LaTourette, how do investments in clean water infrastructure improve public health and grow the economy?
I believe the question is, how do clean water investments improve the environment and the economy?
And grow the economy, yeah.
So the first thing that I'll say is the clean water investments, first and foremost, protect public health and the environment. Our first job is always protecting the health of our residents. And when we have discharge into waterways that is above any of our state or federal standards, there is a risk of public health exposure. That's what this all is based upon. So first and foremost, the investments in clean water are helping to protect people's health and their lives. And then in addition to that value, we have a growing economy in the state of New Jersey. Right? We're continuing to build out our state with new businesses that rely on sewer service expansions. No sewer service, no new multi-family residential projects, no new business expansions into AI or other sectors that we're focused on. Right? And so those investments are critical. Right? It is the bones upon which our entire economy is based.
Thank you. This is another question for you, Mr. LaTourette. The Potomac River provides over 75% of the National Capital Region's drinking water and is the only drinking water source for DC and parts of Northern Virginia, which have just one day of backup water supply, which poses a risk to residents of the National Capital Region, the region's economy, and the national security. What are the immediate and long-term implications of pausing and cutting federal funding for critical Clean Water Act investments?
I think that the impact of the impact of pausing federal funding, scrutinizing it, whatever the words that are being used to describe what's happening, the implications are exactly what we're hearing folks talk about from the perspective of business and industry about permits holding up projects and delaying economic growth. The same is true for either an intended, accidental, temporary, whatever we call it, pause on federal funding to the states that are funding these water infrastructure projects. And we need them now more than ever. I'm glad you point out the issue of water supply, Congresswoman, because in New Jersey, we lack in many places the continuity that is necessary to make sure we have several days of water availability were there to be an issue with a major water source like you're explaining. And that investment is critical to solving that allocation need.
Thank you very much, Mr. LaTourette, and I yield back.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Representative Taylor.
Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member, for holding this hearing today, and thank you to our witnesses for their testimony and insight. With the Ohio River running through my district, I want to ensure the federal government implements policies that utilize the river's resources to support businesses and people while creating jobs and economic opportunities which we desperately need. I'm excited to work with members of this committee to pass meaningful legislation and a strong word of bill that allows the United States to prosper. Previous administrations have implemented several regulations related to the waters of the United States, or WOTUS. Through red tape and litigation, these WOTUS regulations have hindered states, businesses, and energy producers from carrying out simple projects. Mr. Hasten, in your testimony, you highlighted how the Arkansas Electric Cooperative Corporation received a streamlined nationwide permit 3, which took 9 months to get, causing damage to your hydropower plant. I'm confident that a streamlined permit should not have taken 9 months to complete. Based on your expertise, what would a normal time frame have been?
Thank you, Congressman. I think it depends on the work. So there's different permits. I think in our estimation, given that it's a existing structure, everything we were asking for was to return it to the design condition. The fact that the Arkansas River is an extreme water resource. That adds a level of additional scrutiny. So that scrutiny takes some time. But I think in our estimation and planning, we would have thought for a nationwide permit to do a repair on a weir, which is there to prevent cavitation it acts in a way to prevent cavitation of the turbines, which if you don't take care of that can affect reliability. We would have thought, 60 to 90 days, 30 days. It's in that time frame, definitely not 9 months. And then the challenge is when you finally get it, it is valid for 5 years. So that's a good thing. But these conditions in the river that allow this maintenance, you're sort of at the whim of God and nature as to when that'll occur. And if it doesn't happen in the next 5 years, then we have to go through the same process. You see how we could keep missing the boat.
Gotcha. With a 9-month approval process for maintenance repairs on existing energy projects, what does this administration and Congress need to do to eliminate some of these burdensome requirements?
I think definitely continuation of these nationwide programs, which the intent of those is streamlined reviews. Maybe set some clearly defined timelines on what those are, and maybe push us to say, hey, let's do the right thing, but let's do it in a more efficient fashion. Increased coordination between the different agencies, right? Instead of it just being a scattergram of confusing requirements, as Mr. Henner said, we're not sure what you have to comply with. Something that requires, a singular source, a singular, somebody's the lead agency, but there's an answer, here's the answer, we know what it is, and we know what to do. I think also from Arkansas, so Razorbacks, I shouldn't want to put up a transmission line and find a hog wallow out there where the wild hogs have been digging around and there's some mud and some water, and then have to wonder if that's a water of the U.S. But I do have to wonder. And I have to hire consultants to come tell me if a pig wallow in the middle of a field is waters of the U.S. And so the Sackett decision, I think, tried to eliminate some of that lack of common sense and good environmental science. But I think we still have very broad determinations of what are waters of the U.S. And so in my opinion, adhering to what the Supreme Court said and requiring federal agencies to comply with that, and let's get clear definitions. Waters of the U.S., waterways, as I've heard other testimony, we want to protect the water, but a mud wallow in the middle of a field that stops a transmission line, when I've got a huge lithium deposit in Arkansas that I think our nation also wants to get lithium out of the ground, rare earth metals, that kind of thing. If it delays those types of projects, you're just delaying those types of national priorities. And I would say also, just better communication and transparency so that everybody can see, a request is in, here's your due date, here's the status, something that's more transparent than you just send it and then hope for the best and wait for months.
Thank you very much. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, sir. The chair recognizes the representative from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee leadership for holding this hearing, rather. And thank you to all of you guys for being here, for your time. I know it's not easy to sit here and take all of these questions. Listen, as I've sat through this hearing, I think something is becoming abundantly clear, and that's that there's a balance that's needed. I've not heard anyone on this panel say that there should be no federal role for permitting. I've certainly heard several pieces of testimony that indicate that the state needs a more dynamic role and a more, more of a leadership role in the permitting processes. So if we can go down the line in about 45 seconds each or so, can you talk to me about what you think that appropriate balance is between state and federal involvement, starting with you, Mr. Singletary?
Thank you. Like I've already said, I think that the states, this is our homes, right? We are permitting activities, regulating activities that affect us directly, affect our citizens directly. I think having more control at that state level, obviously there's a role for EPA and for the federal government to play in environmental protection, but nobody has as much of an interest as the states do in protecting their environment, but also ensuring that we have a prosperity, economic prosperity in the state. To us, economic prosperity and environmental protection, it's all about the well-being of Oklahomans. So I think that that's where our real interest comes. So I think that kind of highlighting the state's role in implementing these programs, and in some ways even helping design the programs, would be very beneficial.
Thank you, Mr. LaTourette.
I'd say that with respect to the Clean Water Act permitting programs we've been discussing here today, consider the state of New Jersey a case study, if you will. We've grown our economy at the same time that we have consistently, over years, on a bipartisan basis, exceeded minimum federal standards. At the same time, having 90-day, 120-day clocks on permitting decisions. We can do both. The balance exists. It's a bit of a fallacy to suggest that it doesn't.
Mr. Hanners, and I'll note that Nucor has a facility in Eufaula, Alabama, which is in my district.
We do, and thanks for your support, Congressman. We've hit on a number of these items, but I'll just summarize. Nationwide permits are very important to us. We do a lot of projects that have very minimal impact on the environment, and we need that expedited process of being able to get that permit nailed down in an efficient manner. That's understandable, and a little bit more responsive, as you've heard from the others providing testimony. Second thing is pushing more decision-making to the states. I hit it again, but I think it's so important. We have partners with state authorities, and it works very well when we can go to a state, whether it be Alabama, we can talk about the project we're trying to accomplish, and we can get quick answers, and we can get solutions on how we navigate together the permitting process. And every time for us in the states we work in, it has a good outcome. The last thing I'd say is just further limiting judicial review. With each of our projects, I shouldn't say each, but many, we'll get to the finish line of what we expect to be the end of a permit, and we will often have midnight entries of a challenge to the permitting process, and that dramatically can extend the permitting process. And we're not against, we want those challenges to be heard, but we do need some better limits on how long those challenges can persist without a solution.
Thank you. Mr. Hasten.
Yeah, I think clean water and good, efficient permitting for infrastructure are not mutually exclusive. So if you look, what I've heard the question is the balance sort of like where the federal role and the state's role in this process. I see the federal government as sort of that higher overarching looking at how the states impact each other. And so I grew up in Iowa, so if a polluter in Iowa did something, now I live in Arkansas, it's going to make its way down the Mississippi River to Arkansas. So therefore, I think the federal government has a role in that because each state would individually, could act in their own interest or have different rules. So when it comes to setting the standards, when it comes to those types of waterways, when it comes to overarching rules that protect those types of bodies of water and ensures good compliance among the states, I think the federal government has the role there. I think to the maximum extent that they could then say, well, these are the rules, this is what it is, push some of the enforcement of those rules and permitting down to the states where they're in those local communities with those companies. I think to the most extent that you could do that, I think the process would be more efficient.
Thank you. And one thing I'll note about you, Mr. Hasten, one decision that cannot be balanced is your decision to attend Auburn University instead of the University of Alabama. Roll Tide.
War Eagle.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Mr. Harris, I want to talk to you going back to this topic of the West Virginia plant project, that the price overrun almost eclipsed $1 billion. And for the average person, I think that's a very sort of esoteric subject. Can you walk me through what led to that? Who was the source that challenged the permitting process, and how did that cost breakdown unfold once it was in motion?
Certainly, and I appreciate the question, Mr. Congressman.
I mean, the average person has no idea. You get a permit,
right,
and you start to build a project.
Right.
How in the world could it be delayed and then $1 billion added to the cost?
Right, and we make a decision to make an investment like that of many millions of dollars, the biggest in our company's history, the biggest in West Virginia's history. And we're looking forward at a period of, it's going to take us 4 years, potentially longer, to build that project. So once that decision is made to make that investment, we start the permitting process immediately. And if you're asking for how did that go wrong, or where do we run into challenges there, it was really with the Corps of Engineers as it relates to the scope of what needed to be permitted for that project. It started off with a smaller area. It was then broadened months after we got into the project, and that required us to include many other studies on a bigger piece of.
So you received an initial permit, and then the goalposts were moved?
No, we were in the permitting process when the goalpost was broadened.
Okay.
And then that led to, your other point about the cost you incur because of that. You're executing a project like this and you have to buy equipment that's shipping from many locations. And this is massive equipment. So now this equipment has to sit in storage, and you're paying for storage, you're paying for additional transportation. You've made decisions to employ a team, because you have to make those employment decisions very early on in a project to start to build out the capabilities you need from a people standpoint. So now you have extra people that you're paying early, right? You have contractors on site that you need, but they're not doing productive work yet.
Right.
So all that cost stacks up to a very big impact.
And do you have any type of relief once the Army Corps of Engineers starts to move those goalposts? Do you have any way to challenge it, appeal it, question the reasonableness of it?
No, very minimal. And the responsiveness is frustrating at times. It's very hard to get an answer at times. You don't know exactly who to go to or who is the authority making what decision within that Corps of Engineers specific challenge you're trying to navigate. So from a company like our standpoint, from a manufacturer standpoint, it's very frustrating to navigate what the actual challenges you're trying to tackle.
Right. And in terms of the problem, would you say it is the implementor or the actual language within the code itself that's the problem?
That's a tough question.
Is it the regulator or is it the
regulation? It's a combination of both, but I will tell you that we have very different interactions with the Corps of Engineers in different areas on the Ohio River even. So there is an implementor factor, certainly, just an understanding of the policy that is applied differently from this area to this area.
Right.
But that can also be, I think there is a need to tighten up some of that language so that we understand the rules. The implementor has a very clear understanding of the boundaries. And I think that best is answered by pushing more authority to the state in those instances.
Sure. What deference or what consideration does the Army Corps in this West Virginia project, what did they give to the $1 billion increase in cost?
I don't know that they did any.
No consideration.
Very little recognition.
No consideration. So is it also improper for me to conclude or to assume that this project would have led to a more efficient, cleaner operation, more modernized technology, et cetera? Is that correct?
Absolutely.
And so by all of these delays and increased costs, they are preventing a more modern operation from coming online.
Absolutely.
So there's a perverse incentive here.
Absolutely.
They're using waters of the United States to slow the bringing of a new project online.
I would absolutely agree with that.
And that's not just unique to West Virginia and your one project, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Sir, Mr. Hasten, in terms of one of the answers you gave earlier, you said that it takes 5 years, and what stuck out to me is to build a simple natural gas power plant. If there was more regulatory certainty, less judicial review vagueness, and the ability just to construct it with a front-end permit, and that gave you a smooth sail, how long should the construction start to finish take?
If you streamline the permitting process, you just look at what is the time right now until you get your permit, and each project is different, so it's hard to give you an exact number of months.
Yep.
But it would translate directly into reductions in that time that are going to reduce the overall time, right? The delays that are most costly are when you think you've got it all laid out, and then, as Mr. Hanner said, you've purchased very expensive equipment, and then when the permit doesn't come through, where those delays come in, then there are huge carrying costs on these projects. So any efficiency we can do there, and if we can tighten timelines and not lower the standard, but like, why look at the same thing 3 times? Let's do it 1 time.
Yep.
That type of thing, that will translate into savings in projects. And we will be able to get infrastructure in service online faster.
Great. Thank you. The chair recognizes Representative DeSaulnier.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses as well. I represent a district in Northern California that represents most of the San Joaquin, Sacramento Delta, the largest estuary west of the Mississippi, provides over half of the river flow in the state of California. Current president is becoming familiar with these dynamics. I've represented for most of the last 35 years at the local, state, and federal level. Mr. LaMalfa is not here, but we negotiated a partnership when we were in the legislature that would help change the dynamics. So the first time in the history of the state, we would require permitting by our ag industry because their aquifers were collapsing. The San Joaquin Valley creates a third of the vegetables and fruit in the United States. It's an enormous agricultural and economic benefit. So getting this balance from that perspective has always been interesting. In 1972, if my memory serves me, when the Clean Water Act was passed, one of the premier, in my view, pieces of legislation environmentally, and it should be business-wise as well. Richard Nixon was president. It passed out of the Senate with no votes, passed out of the House with, I think, 11 no votes, and then President Nixon vetoed it. It passed. They overrode the veto with huge bipartisan support. In that context, it seems as if, and for all of you, but I'm going to start with Mr. LaTourette and his experience specifically about the Delta smelt and how all of that is intertwined in our instance, but in other instances in environmental protection. But it does seem as if we could have improved our efficiency to the point of, and to the chair's point, of doing more of this up front. Litigation is not an effective way, I don't think, as a progressive member of Congress to provide oversight. So to the degree we can do it, it's more efficient. And I'm somewhat frustrated sometimes that we haven't made it more efficient for everyone, although I think we've made great strides, in particular in California. The California Water Project, one of the great engineering feats in American history, started by Governor Pat Brown, allowed for all of this. So in that context of recent news, having dealt with the Endangered Species Act and the Delta smelt specifically, it's the canary in the coal mine, as a lot of these circumstances are, and still having the balance of when to hold water, when to release water in an environment that's changing every year because of climate change and the relationship to the Sierra snowpack in our case. So could you speak, Mr. LaTourette, in your experience, that dynamic where it's not just about, in our instance, the Delta smelt, it's the canary in the coal mine that they represent about the health of the largest estuary west of the Mississippi, which obviously has a context of clean drinking water and the supply of clean drinking water for the country. So how do we meet that balance, but also in the context of, it's, in this case, it's not just about that particular species, although it's important in and of itself, but it's more the impact that it represents to the health of the Delta in this case.
Can you just say that last part one more time, maybe a little closer to the mic, so I want to make sure I'm getting it. I think it's an Endangered Species Act question.
Well, no, more generally, the health, the environmental health of someplace like the San Joaquin Delta is important to clean water. That if you're not balancing all of this, you're going to have to spend more money on clean water rather than less. So it's the environmental balance that benefits everybody.
So I think it's important, as I said to the Congresswoman before, that we look at this issue a bit more holistically, right? Because any one project that is getting built, and we're concerned about a permit from under the NWP or a permit, under the Clean Air Act for particulate matter, right? There's multiple things going on in the development of any one site that all bear on the greater environmental impact in that region. And so I think we have to look at the permitting matters across the board in a way that we do that to promote coordinated environmental governance that is conscious of the air issue, the land issue, the water issue across the board, is that we have a mechanism inside our state environment agency that brings every internal state agency and the federal agencies that are that touch that to one table. It is a service that we provide to the regulated community because any one regulated actor may not see the greater context of environmental health. If we bring everyone around the table, we can help share that information so that we're doing the best to protect the environmental health across all media.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Always willing to work with you and others to try to make the system work more efficiently.
Thank you, sir. The chair recognizes Mr. Perry for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair and thank the witnesses. This, to me, falls into the category of no good deed goes unpunished. To me, the radical left has been so hell-bent at stopping traditional energy, power, and projects, the things that provide us with nearly every modern imaginable good that we have, and the abuse of the system that we have to do their bidding. That's what I've seen over the course of my time here. The radical left's weaponization, particularly of Section 401 of the Clean Water Act, is a perfect example of the anti-energy mindset. It's actually kind of like an anti-civilization mindset taking hold and being used to attack projects for which they disagree. And as many have stated here along the line, you get a permit, you think you're going to work, and then it's actually a strategy to let you build out as much of the project as possible and stop it at the end to chill investment for future projects, which is just mind-numbing. I'll give you a couple examples. The state of Washington used Section 401 to kill the Millennium Bulk Terminal project due to 9 listed adverse impacts. Now, they might have all been valid adverse impacts. Unfortunately, none of them related to water quality. And again, I'll remind everybody, this is Section 401. The state of New York used Section 401 to deny a pipeline project in Raritan Bay due to the potential greenhouse gas emissions from the project. Well, greenhouse gas emissions are unrelated to water quality, right? This is 401. And oh, by the way, like, I get that they don't love a pipeline. I'm not sure I want a pipeline in my backyard either. But so now we're going to put the fuel on a train, and they're not going to like that either. So then we're going to buy the fuel from Russia or some other country that hates us. This is a brilliant plan. The state of Oregon killed an LNG export terminal using Section 401 process. The state of New Jersey denied a water quality permit for a proposed pipeline project, and they actually cited water quality issues. However, the environmental groups that pushed the state into action made it very clear. They were just simply in opposition to traditional energy projects. Fortunately, during the first term of the Trump administration, it was identified this weaponization for what it is and took action to limit the scope of the 401 to actual water quality issues. And I would cite the gentlelady from Ohio, Representative Sykes. You know, I was alive when the Cuyahoga River was on fire. None of us on this committee, probably none of you in the audience, agree with, a pipe coming out of a factory dumping into a river and filling it with a bunch of stuff that's flammable and killing. Like, none of us agree with that, but that was 50 years ago. We don't do that anymore. And to use 401 to stop legitimate projects for everything other than what 401 is used for, like, has to be recognized, acknowledged, and something has to be done about it. It's vital that Congress acts to make the change permanent. Last Congress, we took action to do so by passing the Water Quality Certification and Energy Protection Improvement Act through this committee and included in an H.R. 1, and it's got to be brought back up and taken across the finish line. It's an important step to stop the radical assault on traditional energy projects. Mr. LaTourette, your Governor Murphy is appointed alternate commissioner to the Delaware River Basin Commission. God bless it. The DRBC, as we know it, is under immense pressure from environmental groups that receive significant federal funding. It's not just paid for by people out in the community that say, well, we wanted to, it's paid for by tax dollars to move forward with a ban on hydraulic fracturing. Now, Pennsylvania's got a lot of resources, so does New York. But in doing so, the commission denied Pennsylvanians in the river basin the ability to access the mineral rights that they themselves own, the underpinning of the United States of America and for free society itself. They can't extract it but for the commission's actions. It's also denied the nation and the world a critical source of natural gas at a time of high price and significant volatility in the market. Again, we turn to Russia because of things like the Jones Act and these type of things to buy gas for New England. And I don't want to be paying those rates, but I don't think those people do either. But Pennsylvania can't get its product to market because of this kind of stuff. The DRBC is an unelected group of bureaucrats. Legislation that I've offered, the Drill Now Act, will be reintroduced this week and addresses the misguided power grab by the DRBC. This River Basin Commission, and there's 3 of them in Pennsylvania that cover the state, impose more stringent regulations than the duly elected representatives of the Commonwealth. That kind of stuff has got to end. Somebody has to be accountable, and it can't be people at these commissions that aren't elected and impose these kind of these regulatory prohibitions on the citizenry and our country. I yield the balance.
Thank you, Representative Perry. The gentleman yields back. Are there any further questions from any members of the subcommittee who have not yet been recognized? Seeing none, I ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record the following letters related to the Clean Water Act permitting from the Industrial Energy Consumers of America, dated February 10th, 2025, the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America, dated February 10th, 2025, American Society of Civil Engineers, dated February 11th, 2025, the Western States Water Council, dated February 11th, 2025, the Waters Advocacy Coalition, dated February 11, 2025, the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality, dated February 11, 2025, and lastly, the Associated Builders and Contractors, dated February 11, 2025. Without objection, so ordered. This concludes our hearing for today. I would like to thank each one of the witnesses for your time and your testimony. The subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you.